Hey guys, it's Mike from the WCA. We're going to take a look at our first game from the spring 2013 session. This is a game played between Ben with the white pieces and Adve with black. These are two kids from the area who compete at the NSCF tournaments and the other local venues. And our class at 12 o'clock and at 2, this session features so many local tournament players that Rusa and I have a great opportunity to get a lot done, because our goal is always to mimic what happens in real tournament games. So when we get kids that play this well and can really behave and concentrate and focus like they were in a tournament, it's a huge advantage for us. So take a look at this game. It is incredibly complicated as we get to the middle, around move 16 or so. So what I would advise you to do is, as often as you'd like, put your mouse cursor over the pause button of this video, so that if something comes at you pretty quickly or there's an idea that you want to kind of emphasize again, pause the video and rewind it and listen to it again. It's really, really helpful. Some of our older students actually set up chessboards and move the pieces along with the voice they're hearing. That's helpful for two reasons. One, you get the feel of being in a real game. And secondly, when you do that, you have to kind of process the move and then learn the letter and number on the board. So, for example, if well, let's take a look at the first couple of moves of the game. E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6. So this basic position, if you were moving the pieces yourself, you would have to actually process those moves as quickly as possible and then just begin to move them on the board. If you do it enough, it's so similar to learning how to type, or if you watch somebody play the piano. They're not looking at their fingers. They just know where the keys are, and chess players are the same. You give us enough time and practice, we're going to tell you where all of those squares are and their names. Okay, so let's get through the opening quickly. This is just the basic setup. Ben with the white pieces is the king of the center fork trick. So for example, if black plays bishop c5 here, there's a little trick, and we're not going to emphasize it in this video, but white can actually take the pawn on e5 here. It looks like a mistake because the black knight will just take, and at first glance it appears that white has lost a piece, but pretty much everybody in both groups know this trick. White will get the piece back by forking. You can see the mouse pointer here, forking both of these pieces. So whichever one black moves, white is going to pick up the other piece. So for example, if they move the bishop to safety, you just take the knight and black takes back. The material is equal. Nobody has won any material, but white has a slight advantage from this position only because as I circle this pawn here on e4, you'll notice that it gives white more space. Black has a bishop here on e5, and that's not a pawn, meaning that it's not as secure. So if it gets attacked, it may have to move, and the white pawn will give Ben a lot of space. And he's played the center fork trick in maybe half of his tournament games. But anyway, Adve doesn't go in for that. He plays it, so from this position, he puts his bishop on e7, which is a quiet move, but it's not without purpose. You're obviously one step closer to castling the king, and black is going to kind of sit back and play a tight formation, but it's clearly a fine move to play. As a matter of fact, as we went through this game, both of these kids followed some theory for quite a long time. So if you're copying moves that were played at the highest level, you're clearly playing your openings well. All right, so just simple development. Bishop to c4, taking that long diagonal. Knight f6, preparing to castle. d3, again opening up this bishop here to come into the game. A little extra protection to the e-pawn. Black castles, white castles. So we use a check mark system sometimes when we go over games. So we'll put a simple check mark next to each move. The reason for that is you have to remember, in this group, we're talking with players primarily under 1,000. So a check mark indicates for us as coaches moves that just make sense. Very often, if a player's under 1,000, they may play moves occasionally that don't kind of fit into the grand scheme of things. Here in this position, every move that each one of these players have put out makes sense. The pieces are supporting each other. Both kings are castled. So so far you're looking at a game that could easily have been played between two masters. Okay, so d6 by black. Not difficult to understand. This bishop here on c8 wants to come into the game, and white plays an excellent move. He plays h3, and this pawn will restrict the bishop here on c8, limiting it basically to either d7 or e6. And Adve decides very early in the game to mix things up and plays the move knight to d4. And when we say mix things up, what we mean by that is he's kind of breaking a rule in chess. Now, it's not the kind of rule that runs the game. Like, for example, you can't move a bishop like a knight. That's not the kind of rule. The rule is, they say don't move the same minor piece twice in a game unless you have all of your pieces developed. And if you look at the mouse pointer, it's obvious here that this bishop on c8 hasn't worked yet. So, what makes him get away with putting this knight on the central square? Well, what works here is, if Ben decides to take the knight, and he does, it's going to change the pawn structure. And by changing the pawn structure in a chess game, you're essentially changing the field that you're playing on. And we've talked about this, so many times. It's so important to pay attention to your pawn structure. So what Adve does here is, well, let's take a look. Ben takes the knight. Oh, pardon me. Ben takes the knight. And then after the pawn takes back, you'll notice here, the knight will retreat from the pawn, that here black has these doubled d-pawns. And these doubled d-pawns can be a problem later in the game if they get attacked. For example, in an endgame, doubled pawns can become very weak because they don't protect each other. But here in the middle game, he's basically forcing Ben to play a structure he's not used to. Is it a bad idea, a good idea? These answers, it's not clear. But what it does is it mixes up the game. You're making your opponent play a structure that's not so comfortable for him. So in the game, Adve plays pawn to c5 to protect it. However, I want to show you something quickly that was another possibility. He could have played here pawn to d5. And it looks a little strange because you might be giving up a pawn. But if white takes, knight takes, this pawn here on d4 that I'm circling is hanging. And in chess language, a hanging piece or pawn is just something that can be taken for free immediately. So at this very moment, it's hanging. So if you take it, what happens, for example, if black plays knight to b6, attacking the bishop, and at the same time the queen here is attacking the knight on d4? Well, we could protect it with a move like bishop to e3. The knight will take, for example, pawn will take back, and in this position white is up a clear pawn. However, what I want to talk about is, if I highlighted these files for you, you'll notice, again, let's pay attention to structure. There are no center pawns left. Both D and E pawns for both players have left the board. And one of the WCA ideas that we try to reinforce is, when you're talking about minor pieces, so here there are two sets. You have a bishop and a knight here for white, and two bishops for black. The two bishops are actually, and I'll highlight those for you, very useful when there are no center pawns in most cases. And the reason for that is, if this entire area in the center is open, then eventually these bishops can kind of cover all of these diagonals that I'm highlighting for you, making them very powerful. The problem here for black, however, is he is down a pawn. Is it worth it here? Probably not. But Adve could have mixed the game up further by going in for this line. Okay, so let's go back to c5, and it is white's move here. Here it's a very, very difficult position to play if you're seeing something like this for the first time, because a lot of players under 1,000 will say, hey, look, I'm getting my pieces out, but I'm really not sure what to do. One idea might be, if you're not clear what to do with your pieces, then sometimes you can play against your opponents. So for example, if you wanted to pause the video, which piece do you think black is going to develop next? And with a little bit of time, you probably come up with this bishop on c8 is at some point going to want to get into the battle. So where is he going? In this position, he could come to d7, although e6 might be a direct challenge to the white bishop. Maybe not a bad idea. So here, Ben with white could have tried the move knight f4, which prevents the bishop from coming to e6. So maybe he would play bishop to d7 now. And in this position, let's take a look at what the bishop's doing from here. You see this diagonal? It's open. That may give black an opportunity to put the pawn on b5 and chase this guy away. To prevent that, there's a positional move. And when we say positional, this is not some great tactic. This pawn move is basically just to stop black's idea. And then, for example, maybe black could post the bishop on c6, and this would be the position. Kind of equal. I mean, at the scholastic level, under 1,000, anything could happen from here. But you know, these are ideas that crop up in your games, and you'd see like, wow, it's amazing that these guys are finding this much, this many ideas in their games, and they're only rated 900 or so. But yeah, it's possible. You guys are doing really, really well. Maybe black has, you know, a problem in the future with these two pawns being doubled, but that's a long, long way away. Okay, so let's go back after Adve protects his pawn, and Ben plays the move knight g3 instead. Again, not a bad idea at all. He's going to cover these light squares over here and get his knight out of the way, open the diagonal for his queen. Really good game. And now a move I like very much. Adve again pushes, and by pushing that pawn to d5, he's going to try to eliminate his doubled pawns, which would have happened here, for example, if Ben takes, knight takes, and I don't know, something like bishop to d2. And here we always say it's a game. You know, anybody could win from here. But black has at least improved his pawn structure. He doesn't have these two pawns over here on e5 anymore. But let's take a look at what Ben did instead. Ben decided to mix it up himself and play the move e5. Now, by doing that, each player has a chance to take a minor piece with a pawn, and they both do. So here, Adve takes on c4, Ben takes on f6, hitting the bishop takes back, and the pawn takes here. Okay, so what I want you to do for a moment is, if I go back to show you this middle game position that we had, you'll see that black was the one with the two double D pawns. If you go to the current position here, after these trades, it's funny that it is white who now has these doubled pawns. So it's kind of funny how black's aggressive move in the center kind of turned the tables in terms of pawn structure. Okay, so after pawn takes on c4, black to play, bishop to e6, developing move, attacking an undefended pawn. Terrific. These guys are playing really, really well. And now the first move that could possibly get white into trouble, queen e2. It's a move obviously to protect the pawn, and when we say get you into trouble, you have to be careful because the queen is now on an open file. So for example, after a move like rook e8, you'll notice these pieces line up and the queen gets a little bit uncomfortable on that square. She'll probably maybe have to come into d3, or you clearly want to get her off that line. So watch out for moves like that, you know, or take advantage of it if you see your opponent's queen out in the middle. Okay, so after queen e2, black plays queen to d6. So instead of taking advantage of the file, he plays queen d6, which for coaches is a sign of understanding in chess. What understanding? Well, big question for players of all levels. What do I do with my rooks in a chess game? Well, you have, if you're black, you have one up here on f8 and on a8, and if I back the queen up for a moment, you'll see that she's interfering with their connection. So after queen d6, the black rooks are now connected. The lower level players, the new players, they don't think that's such a big deal because there's no immediate threat. But you have to kind of look ahead in chess, obviously. And those two rooks are now free to go to any open file or any other square back there that they need to. Okay, so the only problem with queen to d6 is, Ben now takes advantage of the fact that they can get rid of one of black's bishops. And by playing knight to e4, you have a fork on the queen here and the bishop here on f6. Now, to protect the bishop with the queen is the right idea, because you don't want this knight taking this bishop and having to take back with that g-pawn. That's going to really terribly weaken your king. So she basically has two choices, to go to e7 or to e5. And the reason why we encourage the players to really mix things up and to play these kinds of moves is it gives your opponent a chance to make mistakes. And in this position, black makes the first critical mistake and plays queen to e5. You'll notice the queens are on the same line together. The idea of queen to e5 is obviously if the knight takes, the queen can recapture. However, there's a downside to this move. So I'd like you to pause your video and see if you can take advantage of the queen's location in the center of the board. Okay, now here's where the complications start. The move is f4. And by playing f4, you're going to not only attack the queen, but you're going to also threaten to push the pawn one box further at some point and play f5, which will hit the bishop as well. There are so many lines in this position that could be played. Let's take a look at just two. The natural retreat, queen c7, could be black's worst choice, because from here, white has this almost ready-made attack. Knight takes pawn check, pawn takes is forced, pawn f5. Pawn f5 will not only gain a tempo on the bishop, it will also create what we call a pawn wedge. And a wedge is basically when one of your pawns is pushed up against another pawn of the other team's. And what happens is, after this bishop moves away, check out these four pieces here. It looks like a stick or a line of pieces. This is essentially a wall, and that wall is not going to be moved anytime soon. If this wall can't move, then basically all of the pieces on this side of the board that I'm circling with the mouse, they can't get over that wall. Now, why is that important? Well, look who's on the inside of the wall, the black king. So this pawn structure, this formation, is not good for the safety of this king. So for example, let's say black retreats the bishop to d7, white will now take advantage of the holes on the inside of the wall. And again, you can stop the video and kind of get a feel for how you would play, but bishop h6 is a terrific answer. We're really not interested in that rook. At least not yet. We're much more interested in this this square right here, because you can just imagine queen check, checkmate, and that's something that's pretty easy to spot. Problem is how to stop it. We could move the king to h8, but that would invite a very cool tactic, queen e7, and queen e7 not only hits the rook twice here because it's being attacked here, it pins this bishop, but there's also a problem with the f6 pawn, because white is threatening to just take it and mate the king. So that's clearly going to be a big problem if you allow white to do this. Okay, so what else then? If you go back after f4, you could try the move, after queen c7, and we have our pawn wedge. You could try the move in this position after bishop to d7, bishop to h6. You could try the move queen to g3. And queen to g3 obviously stops your queen from coming in to check, but this is going to run into the same pattern that we're talking about almost through the whole video. Please pay very close attention to when your pieces or your opponent's pieces line up. It's a simple line trick. So for example, how about rook f4? The threat is so simple, just coming over, you're gonna fork the king and the queen. If the king tries to break that, by getting off that line, rook here again, and black is in big trouble. If the queen runs away, I think you have mate in 2 here. So you can pause your video and figure that out, and you'll see that there's a forced mate there. Okay, so with all the other alternatives, and there are several here, so if you're really ambitious, if you go to the move f4, which is what we think white should have played, you can spend a lot of time and make a tactics exercise and try to create your own play. Just one other quick line. What if Adve says, hey, I like your idea, you're going to hit my queen, but there's no law that says I have to retreat. What if I attack yours? And this is a cool line. I'll just give you a quick look at this, that if we play c takes d here, there's queen check, bishop e3, very natural to get out of check and develop, queen takes pawn, queen takes queen, bishop takes, rook hitting the bishop, bishop offering a trade, and this is actually going to turn out really well for white, because after the rook takes on b7, white's pieces are really active. Let me just show you a typical mistake by players under 1,000. Be very careful about these moves. A move like f5, trying to chase this knight away. For example, let's say I just put it in on knight to d6. If you take some time analyzing this position, you'll see that white is doing really well here. Their rooks are much more active. The bishop here on e6 is going to have trouble because of this pawn restricting his movement this way, and white's pawn restricting it this way. This knight is going to be really tough. This pawn on c4 is passed, meaning there are no black pawns that can stop it, and black is going to have a hard time holding this position. Okay, so let's go back after queen e5, and let's find the move that Ben actually played. He played rook to e1, which looks fine. You're supporting your queen. You're also adding some pressure onto this file, but it kind of gives black a move to get something done, and he still allows, after rook a to d8, this was his move, he still allows the move f4. There's a small difference here. In this position, you can take a look at this line for a moment. This is kind of cool. If the queen sidesteps and comes here, still protecting the bishop, it looks like you get a lot as white playing g4, because when the queen moves out of the way, it appears that black is going to get forked with f5. But again, if you're paying attention, the second that queen landed on g6, all of you should have noticed it's on the same line as the king, which would allow bishop takes f5 with the pin. And it's still a very dangerous position here because things are starting to open up, but it was playable. Anyway, so let's take a look. After rook a to d8, I think white taking here is probably a mistake, because when that piece comes off, the queen takes back, and now the game is almost starting to flatten out a little bit. When you take here, I want you to highlight the one factor in the position that is going against white, and that is this rook here is not defended. However, when I say it's flattening out, if black doesn't take advantage of any inactive piece, for example this rook here, it's going to get harder and harder to win this game, because as the pieces come off, you'll notice the bishops that are left are of opposite color, and in the end games that can be very drawish. So if black doesn't get an attack going soon, or white, then this game could kind of fizzle out and end in a draw. However, white essentially loses the game in one move here. Amazing how these tactics work. And the problem with white's move, they played b3. Again, guys, diagonals are straight lines. This is a straight line. There's a bishop, a queen on f6, a rook on a1. The other reason why we highlighted this rook is it's not protected. It's a loose piece, so you have to be very careful with those guys. So as soon as he plays b3, Adve kind of strikes with d3, and after d3, white's in trouble because the rook is hanging to the queen and the queen is attacked by the pawn. So not much of a choice. You take the pawn, the queen takes the rook, and again, there's a small glimmer to get something back. Again, simple line trick. The black queen and the white rook are on the same line. Who's in between? The bishop. Bishop to g5. The bishop attacks the rook, and the rook attacks the queen. So black is forced to retreat the queen. He played queen to d4. White picks up some material. Black takes back. And in this position, black is now up a piece. At the grandmaster level, the guys or girls would probably shake hands and white would resign. At this level, whole different ball game. White offers a queen trade, and trading down when you're losing is not the greatest idea. There's really not much else he can do. Maybe try to get into a rook ending. And black decides to snatch a pawn. White goes in for the queen trade. Rook takes, and then f4. And the reason he got the queens off the board is he's playing for a trick. And it's obvious that if the bishop were to take this pawn, if you move it up one more box and the bishop takes, there's going to be a checkmate here on the back rank. So I give white a lot of credit for trying to stir something up, and black simply makes Luft, as they say, which is German for air. He's got a space to put his king, and all those back rank threats are over. You also can play a move like rook d2 here, which also protects the mate, because if you play f5, obviously you're not going to take that pawn. You just put your bishop on to d7. And when you do that, I'll highlight these entry squares for this rook. They're all covered. If the rook were to come in here to e7, he's not attacking anything. It's protected by, this bishop would be protected by the rook. And then once the king steps over, you're going to kick that rook out. So that was another idea. So after h6, black, after the queens come off, f4, h6, white then really tries to push this this pawn through. Okay, from here, black kind of makes a mistake here. It's interesting how he decided to play it. What we had thought about when Roos and I looked at this game together, we were thinking a couple of ideas. One, you could play, if you're black, you could play a move like pawn f5. Now, earlier when that knight was on the board, I told you that would be a very weakening move. But here there's an idea behind it. You kind of stop this from moving. So you're basically going to stop white from moving these pawns on this side of the board. If you get attacked, you simply start bringing your king into the game. And even if black tries to penetrate and attack some things, you play a move like pawn to b6. And if you spend some time looking at black's position, it's like a rock. It's impossible for white to break through, and you kind of just sit on this position, and eventually you'll find use for this extra piece. For example, this pawn chain here can be broken down with moves like a5, a4, and eventually this extra bishop will win the game for you. But Adve chooses a pretty interesting continuation. He decides to give up his bishop for 2 pawns, because the pawns are equal now. They each have 6. He takes on h3, but this allows, obviously we're going to take that and take the challenge here. So this is not a pleasant endgame for white to play at all. He's 2 pawns down, but I want to show you something. Ben here chose the move f5, but by all means, when you're playing in a rook ending, and this is clearly an ending, right? Each player only has a rook, so in order to win this, somebody's going to have to make a queen. Please keep your rooks active, even if it means giving up more pawns. A move like rook to d1, and you'll see how active this rook is. We're ready to penetrate into black's position. For example, let's say that black comes after white's last pawn on this side. So when this guy goes, there's going to be 3 of these pawns running. I admit this is not pleasant for white, but at least after check, king h7, rook d7, forking, let's say you take that pawn, and white takes this pawn. White's in trouble, but if this pawn goes, white is going to have a passed pawn on his own. And you'll notice the black king on this side of the board is not in position to stop that. The white king, however, might be able to slow up these pawns if they start coming in. So is white going to be able to hold this? Probably not. But if white activates that rook, there's a chance. Okay, so the class ended shortly. Black played f6, and white just attacked the rook, and the rook decided in this position to go to h5. But I have news for you guys. At the scholastic level, at the 1,000 and under, this position is not so clear. Okay, that's a lot, and it's amazing how much material is inside one scholastic game. So please, if you have the time, go over this more than once. This is your work. This is, these are games from the classes that you guys all participate in, all right? We will contact your parents to make sure that all of you have some tactical work that you're doing, and we'll see you in class next week.